Great, welcome everyone. We're going to get started with the call for our participants. Thank you very much for joining today. This is the second call of the Tropical Forest Alliance's Jurisdictional Exchange Network. My name is Petra Tanos. I work on the TFA Secretariat and I'm leading this network. And the vision for this network is to create space for expert exchange on the global challenges of jurisdictional and landscape approaches to support the responsible production and sourcing of forest risk commodities. And our idea is really to create space for learning, for exchange, for the discussion of cross-cutting issues and sharing best practices. And this is our second call. And the topic today will be an overview of selected jurisdictional initiatives and methodologies. We developed the content for this call based on input from the broader community. The network is envisioned to be led by TFA partners. So at any time that you have suggestions or questions or topics that you would like to see discussed, please do share that. This call very much comes out of an ask from the broader community. We're very excited to have today presenters from IDH Rainforest Alliance and WWF US. So welcome to Willem, Jeff, and Lloyd, who will be giving us an overview of their initiatives. Where this is really emerging from is that observation that a number of businesses and others are really looking for guidance on how companies can link to or engage with jurisdictions and jurisdictional initiatives. And a number of initiatives and methodologies have emerged to answer that question and to provide some options for linking in. And today we have the opportunity to hear from 3 of these initiatives and to learn more about the complementary way that they interact and what their niche role is in the broader space and the different sort of objectives and the different roles that these different tools play. So we're, again, very thrilled to have Willem presenting on behalf of IDH Verified Sourcing Areas, Jeff Malder from Rainforest Alliance speaking about a LandScale, and Lloyd Gamble from WWF US to present the commodities and jurisdictions approach. I will pass it over to our speakers in just a moment, but I do want to let you know that you will have an opportunity to ask questions throughout the presentations using the question and answer tool on Zoom. So as the presenters are speaking, please go ahead and type in your questions, and we will have some time allotted at the end of the hour to answer some of the questions that are posed by the audience. So Willem, over to you to get started. Please go ahead.
Okay, do you see my screen?
Yes, we have your screen and we can hear you.
So great, that worked well. Thank you very much, Petra, for your introduction. Good afternoon. This is Willem Klaassens. I'm responsible at IDH for the Verified Sourcing Area concept, the development and the rollout. And I'm happy to be able to explain you a little bit about what Verified Sourcing Areas is. If you have questions, yes, indeed, do place them. If we don't have enough time today, then do not hesitate to approach me on a separate basis. Let me see how I can get to the next page. Yes. So we believe that we need a new approach to sustainability, and the reasons for those are that the present sustainability systems don't create the impact that we really desire. We are not able to use the strengths of all the parties involved in sustainability, and we also struggle to get up to a mainstream business. And we are not able to lift the base sustainability and stop deforestation at this stage. So we need a new sustainability solution that, yes, does include all the producers and all the land, the government land, but also smaller producers. And yes, we need to get on a ladder of sustainability. That means that we have to embrace continuous improvement. And we have to make sure that we are not looking at one commodity, but at all commodities that are being produced. And yes, if we can do that by creating a link between the region and the market and provide a buyer with a solution to meet their sustainability targets, then yes, we are onto something that is better than what we had before. It brings the landscape approach to mainstream markets. We call that new solution verified sourcing areas. And basically the verified sourcing areas is a cooperation between a compact, a transparent supply chain and a committed end buyer. And I will explain to you what these three pillars of the verified sourcing areas mean. And only by working, three pillars working together, we can create impact that we so desire. So a compact is an agreement between local public, private and civil society stakeholders. They are looking at sustainability issues and identify KPIs and timelines that they can set in a jurisdiction. So not in single farms, but in a whole jurisdiction. And if you do that correctly, you can create end buyer interest and impact-driven support. Yeah? And that all for continuous improvement of the local sustainability issues. How can we do that? Only by making visible what's happening in a jurisdiction. And for that, the verified sourcing area makes use of an online platform. So the other end of the spectrum is the committed end buyers, not just end buyers, but committed end buyers. They are most of the time bound by self-imposed sustainability commitments. Yes, they're looking to source their commodities in line with these commitments, but they have not very often an idea how to do that. Yeah? And they are ready to commit to improving sustainability in jurisdictions because they buy from these jurisdictions. And they can achieve continuous and lasting improvement if they have a visible link between a VSA of their choice. They can create visible improvement with their sustainability funds, knowledge and resources by looking at what's happening on the VSA platform. And yes, they can monitor that impact through this platform. And all the while they're buying products from a verified sourcing area, a specific jurisdiction. In the middle, we have to make sure that we have transparency. Transparency fit for purpose, we call it. More transparency than a company needs is not necessary. We need to make sure that we ensure that we can get the companies up to a level of information where they feel comfortable of supporting sustainability. That means that we have to create a direct link between buyers and production regions. We have to make sure that we provide the supply chain transparency through the verified sourcing area platform. And yes, we have to make sure that the supply chain actors start cooperating on sustainability. In the end, that may include full traceability if necessary, but sometimes that's not even necessary. So, how are we going to make sure that end buyers are on the side of the committed end buyers? For this, we're creating a verified sourcing area online platform. It shows what's happening in the compact, in the stakeholder agreement, what's happening to the goals, what's happening to the indicators, and what's happening to the projects that are being financed through this compact. The companies, as well as the consumers, can look into this, but also the end buyers. And also the jurisdiction can have a look at the platform and see what's happening in their supply chain. So how do we going to give this insight? By creating a compact tool. And this tool makes visible what's happening in the jurisdiction. It basically has two elements. It shows how to build and implement a compact. Because obviously, if there's no agreement among local stakeholders, there's no compact, you don't have the possibility to attract end buyers to your jurisdiction. It has to have the right governance conditions, and it has to ensure transparency. So the other thing that the compact tool looks at is sustainability goals and KPIs on VSA global impact themes, and also local impact themes. So the global impact themes, those are themes that are in line with what companies globally are looking at, the most important things that they have in their commitments towards their consumers. So if, as a compact, you put these things into your agreement, if you set yourself ambitious goals for these 4 elements, then obviously you can attract these companies, and these companies can start helping you achieve your goals. Also, there have to be local impact teams, because not everybody in the jurisdiction or every jurisdiction is the same in the world. Some jurisdictions have issues that others don't have, and we need to address these as well. So local impact teams, those compacts are really formed. Taken Verified Sourcing Area online platform. And this is also a part of the Verified Sourcing Area where we can expect to work together with others, because we want to make sure that we look at similar things that are important for companies. And if they're important for Verified Sourcing Area, then obviously they are important for other concepts as well. And we have started discussions on this. So who are the stakeholders in the Verified Sourcing Areas? What we see is that the value proposition for VSA touches on every stakeholder, whether you're a committed end buyer, whether you're a local compact stakeholder, whether you're in the supply chain or other organizations. Everybody can find something that is positive in VSA Global, in the way of working together, the way the 3 pillars work together. I'm not going to read this out. You will have a copy of the presentation and can have a look at it at a later stage. So in order to test the 3 pillars and the working together of the committed end buyers with the jurisdictions, with the compacts, we started readiness and are doing a few more in other products and in other countries to ensure that what we do is really useful, both for the companies that are going to be committed end buyers, as well as for the jurisdictions who want to attract committed end buyers to their jurisdiction and let them help to achieve sustainability goals. You can see that presently we're working in Brazil, in Indonesia and Vietnam, but also we have started our discussions in Colombia, in Africa countries, Cameroon and Cote d'Ivoire, in India, and obviously in other parts of Indonesia. The whole Verified Sourcing Area concept is being supported by a Global Steering Committee. The Global Steering Committee exists of companies, knowledge organizations, and financial institutions who help us think through the workings of the Verified Sourcing Areas, how the 3 pillars of the Verified Sourcing Area work together. And we have regular meetings and working group meetings to design and develop the different elements of the Verified Sourcing Area. I think, Petra, that was it already. I hope I've stayed in my 15 minutes.
Yes, thank you very much, Willem. Jeff, please do go ahead and start sharing your screen. And just to reiterate to the participants, if you have any questions, please do put them in the question and answer box. We already have received a couple, so thank you for that. And just please do continue adding questions. And Jeff, let me hand it over to you.
Great, thank you very much, Petra. Can you see my screen and hear me?
Yes, we can hear you and see the screen.
Wonderful. Okay. First of all, thanks very much to TFA for convening this network and for the opportunity to present, and for all of you for listening in. I'm happy to be presenting today on behalf of the LandScale Partnership, which comprises 8 organizations, which I'll introduce a bit later. Our initiative is around powering sustainability in landscapes and jurisdictions through the measurement of performance. So I'll be introducing a little bit the challenge and context for our work, providing an overview of the LandScale tool, and then describing our development process and some next steps. So I think all of us are on this call here because we agree with the premise that landscape and jurisdictional scale action is needed if we're to address today's pressing environmental and social challenges while still providing adequate supplies of food and other commodities. But of course, landscapes are complex and their management almost always involves many parties. So there's a missing secret ingredient here, which is trusted information. And this is something that we've mostly lacked to date, but is critical if we want to drive better incentives for landscape sustainability, so that if conditions improve in a landscape, that will benefit my company, my bank, my administration. This information is also critical for guiding effective action in landscapes and demonstrating progress. And most critically, linking actors inside the landscape to those outside the landscape. LandScale is addressing this challenge in this context head-on by developing a standardized approach to assess and communicate sustainability status and trends of landscapes. And this system serves three main functions for users. The first is to understand what's going on in landscapes, conditions and trends around sustainability. That can either be done through a risk lens, for instance, in the case of investment screening, or safeguards around issues such as land grabbing, or through an opportunity lens. For instance, companies that are looking to do preferential sourcing where there's stronger performance or where conditions are more favorable. We also want to encourage actors not just to react to conditions in landscapes, but to improve them. And this is where LandScale and LandScale assessments can inform the work of landscape actors to change policies, investments, government programs, law enforcement, training, and other things that are needed to drive sustainability on the ground. And finally, where there has been strong performance, those involved in driving that performance would like to be able to claim progress. But for this to be credible, it needs to be assessed and communicated in consistent ways with an adequate level of validation and transparency. So communicating results is a third key function of LandScale. LandScale's application is not restricted to any one sector or any one type of actor. It assesses and can help support sustainability in any rural landscape dominated by natural resource-based industries and supply chains. And these can include agribusiness, forestry, extractive industries, as well as large-scale infrastructure. And the tool works to support the efforts of both local landscape actors, such as local governments, producers, and communities, as well as those that are outside the landscape, but participate directly in its future, such as companies that procure commodities, international donors, financial institutions, and others. And this approach really recognizes that successful landscape and jurisdictional initiatives usually need to consider multiple economic sectors and involve all of these types of actors. So just to give a few tangible examples of groups that are expressing interest in LandScale, companies that wish to take a landscape or jurisdictional approach to sourcing. They would like to find a landscape that has good enabling conditions where they can concentrate their purchasing and invest over time to drive improvements. Investors, such as private banks, multilateral investment banks, or pension funds that might be pursuing land-based investments and recognize that doing site-level due diligence is not sufficient. LandScale is a way to highlight opportunities and risks that can be addressed at a broader scale. Additionally, actors within landscapes that are working to make their landscape a model for green development and would like to be able to benefit from this progress to translate that into economic benefits and to continued political support for the work they're doing. So these are all the different use cases for the LandScale tool. So let me say a little bit more about this initiative and how LandScale will work. So LandScale is a collaborative initiative. There are three organizations that co-lead the Secretariat. In addition to Rainforest Alliance, those are VERA and the the Climate Community and Biodiversity Alliance, CCBA. We have 5 additional growing partners, and the list is growing. And we have an advisory group representing the key sectors that are interested in applying tools such as LandScale. So let's take a look under the hood and see what powers LandScale. There are 4 main components, as shown on the screen here. At the heart is the LandScale Assessment Framework and Guidance. So this is a framework of goals, indicators, and metrics that I'll say more about in a moment, as well as the guidance on how to apply this framework. For instance, how to define landscape boundaries, how to select appropriate indicators to a given context, how to carry out a LandScale assessment, and how to collect data on the chosen indicators. In early August, we published a first draft of the assessment framework for public consultation, and that consultation is open until mid-October. So we're looking forward to receiving feedback from experts and prospective users of tools such as this on the framework and its application. The other 3 elements of the LandScale framework include a verification mechanism. So this is a way of validating the information on landscape performance and trends. And a range of verification models are being developed, including third-party, where the highest level of external validation is needed, as well as second-party, which can serve other applications of the tool. Also, the development of a data and reporting platform, as well as supporting tools, which we're still in the process of scoping and seeking user feedback on. For instance, some stakeholders have expressed interest in a method to document the contribution of individual actors to landscape results. And these last 3 components are currently under consultation in their concept phase, with full systems under development beginning now and continuing after the consultation closes. So the landscape assessment framework includes 4 primary pillars. Those are ecosystems, human well-being, governance, and productivity. This assessment framework provides a common way of looking at landscape sustainability across landscapes around the world, but also this is a framework that can be tailored to context. So there are certain indicators, those shown in boldface here, that would be required in any landscape where this tool is applied. Other indicators are landscape dependent, and those would be applied where conditions in the landscape indicate that that issue is particularly relevant. For instance, water quantity would be a required indicator in landscapes where there are water stress issues. There's also some additional optional indicators that are not shown on the screen here, but are in the full consultation document. And those are ones that can be selected by landscape actors based on their own targets and priorities. So with respect to ecosystems, the framework addresses protection of forests and other natural ecosystems, biodiversity, and critical ecosystem services. For human well-being, we're looking at poverty and standard of living, as well as human rights. For governance, the focus is on land and resource rights, as well as participatory and transparent processes for land use planning and management. So these are critical preconditions to sustainable landscapes. And for production, looking at both the productivity and resource use efficiency of production systems around agriculture, agroforestry, and tree plantations. So this is just a screenshot of what you'll see in the public consultation document, how the assessment framework is presented. The hierarchy of topics, landscape goals, indicators, and then metrics are the specific quantities that would be assessed in order to provide information for the LandScale assessment. All of the indicators are also benchmarked against the Sustainable Development Goals, which of course are a common currency for governments to report on sustainability and increasingly for companies as well. I also want to mention that there is no threshold or minimum performance level in order for landscapes to participate in the LandScale assessment process. Users may set targets if they wish, and LandScale would provide the data to assess progress toward these targets. But there's no minimum requirements to participate in the program. And as the assessments are done, the data, which eventually will be on the online platform, would provide information on topics such as these. So we might see a time series for quantities such as how much natural forest is being converted per year. What are the poverty rates within the landscape, and how is that disaggregated by across key vulnerable groups? These are all topics that key users have expressed interest in having trusted information on. Okay, so just a few words about where we are in the process and what will happen next. The public consultation, as I mentioned, on the first version of the LandScale framework and guidance is open until mid-October. We're currently testing LandScale at a network of 5 pilot landscapes. And early next year, we'll be launching a second version of the framework for public consultation with collaboration of the other components. At the time, a working study are encouraging expressions of interest from landscapes that would like to be early appliers of the tool at that stage. Based on the feedback then, the full LandScale framework is expected to be published by the end of next year and would be ready for full-scale application by all interested users. Our pilots are a critical way to test out the assessment framework, to apply the verification mechanisms and the data platform as it's developed, and also to understand how the LandScale tool can effectively drive incentives from external actors to those actors within the landscapes. So with that, I'd like to thank you for your interest in this, and certainly encourage you to visit the LandScale website. That's landscale.org. From that website, you can access the public consultation document, which provides a lot more detail on the tool and how it will work. We also have an online feedback platform on Collaborates that is linked from the LandScale page, where you can provide feedback in that online tool. Please also join our mailing list and follow us on Twitter, which you can also do from the website. So thanks very much, and I'll pass the word back to, or over to Lloyd.
Great, thanks, Jeff. I'm pulling open my screen right now to share. Can everybody see my title slide?
Hi, Lloyd. Yeah, we can hear you, and we've got your slides on the screen. Thanks.
Great. I apologize, you all might hear a little background noise today, 1 or 2 screaming 4-month-olds. They should be out the door about 15 minutes ago. So thanks, Petra, TFA. Hi, everybody. It's great also to have this opportunity to speak about the commodities jurisdictions approach today and begin to think together about how these different platforms may complement each other, as well as how we can minimize the potential for any confusion around multiple developing tools. So I'm Lloyd Gamble, and I work with World Wildlife Fund's Forest team based in Washington, DC. And I should make clear up front that this is not a WWF-owned initiative, but rather that WWF US is an implementing partner of CJA with Climate Focus and Meridian Institute under a cooperative agreement with the US Department of State. So I'll be speaking on behalf of the implementing partners today. Also, I'm going to assume that people on this call are fairly familiar with the general context regarding the emergence and importance of landscape and jurisdictional approaches. So I'll get right into describing this specific methodology. So first, a glance at the landscape of landscape approaches here. And to be clear, these are not the only ones, but perhaps a few of the most prominent right now. We would describe CJA as an approach to help companies identify jurisdictions that are achieving reduced deforestation at scale, and to strengthen the incentives for these jurisdictions to achieve these results, specifically through increased sourcing or procurement. So I'll mention a few potentially differentiating factors up front, other than that CJA clearly needs a logo. CJA is not a layered partnership model between companies and jurisdictions, but rather an information platform to simply bring more business to jurisdictions that are showing real results at scale. So these jurisdictions would typically be very progressed in their sustainability goals. Also, CJA is focused primarily on deforestation as a performance metric, though we anticipate that most eligible initiatives will have and report on other sustainability goals. And lastly, it's worth noting that CJA is closely modeled after UNFCCC guidance for REDD+. So it will naturally apply most easily to REDD+ programs and is intended to provide incentives on top of the climate finance intended to support these programs. So the basic theory of change behind CJA is this: by providing additional incentives in the form of improved market access to jurisdictions that are reducing deforestation and degradation at scale, CJA will catalyze better results in these initiatives and provide supply chain businesses with another avenue for reducing deforestation associated risks. So this also captures the intended benefits on the business side to businesses who are, by increasing procurement in these geographies, may not be able to claim they are deforestation free unless they are layering this with another approach, but they can demonstrate support for initiatives that are targeting the systemic challenges underlying deforestation and beginning to show results. So the implicit assumption here is that visibly increased business opportunities for a jurisdiction can be a meaningful lever for government and multilateral platforms implementing these initiatives to build more support and the political will needed for success. So here's a snapshot of how CJA is envisioned to work. First, national and subnational scale programs who opt in are assessed by independent experts for consistency with criteria initially established by sourcing companies for what we're calling preferential sourcing, and I'll discuss these criteria in a few minutes. Two global standards for jurisdictional forest and climate programs have already been positively assessed against CJA's eligibility criteria. So programs approved and implementing under these standards do not need to be reassessed and are essentially grandfathered in. Then information on eligible initiatives is provided on a public website for use by anyone, including, of course, company and procurement representatives. Then companies in turn may use this information to inform and or prioritize sourcing of commodities where relevant to their supply chains. So pretty simple model overall. A summary of institutional arrangements before I get into a few more details. So since CJA is essentially an umbrella approach over widely consulted guidance from the REDD+ space, the idea has been to maintain a fairly light governance model and also to not require jurisdictional implementers to duplicate analyses and documentation that they have already generated, for example, under different multilateral funding streams. So we work with an informal and open consortium of about 70 representatives from civil society, private sector, northern and southern governments, all of whom participate as individuals and not as formal representatives of their institutions. And as implementing partners of the methodology, WWF US, Climate Focus, and Meridian consult regularly with Department of State as a primary funder and with consortium members who participate in a number of ways, including quarterly governance calls, volunteering for assessment panels, and teaming with us on outreach, for example, to companies and even to support jurisdictional proponents in pulling together some of the information needed for assessment. So this slide lays out the eligibility criteria for CJA in very broad brushstrokes and is modeled after a statement from Unilever and Marks & Spencer at the Paris COP that signaled that they would increasingly seek to link their business with jurisdictions that meet these criteria. And they include a strategy for reducing deforestation and degradation at scale, a robust system for measuring and monitoring land-based greenhouse gas emissions against a baseline or forest reference level. Certainly a commitment to social and environmental safeguards and monitoring and reporting against this. An inclusive multi-stakeholder approach, and some indications of high-level political commitment. Typically, we'd like to see inclusion of the land sector in the NDC, for example. So now for a few details on how jurisdictions are assessed against these criteria. So first, only jurisdictional initiatives that opt in will be assessed. Participation both from the jurisdictional initiative side and from companies is completely voluntary. And second, only positively assessed initiatives are profiled on the website. This is intended really as a green light approach. So initiatives that do not meet criteria will be informed of the assessment results, and hopefully this will facilitate their being able to to address any outstanding gaps. And regarding the actual assessment, a pre-assessment technical review is conducted by subject matter experts on the climate focus team, according to a detailed assessment guide developed by the consortium. There are about 25 questions in this guide that are addressed individually in order to score the criteria, the overall criteria that I just mentioned. And the results of this technical review are then provided to a volunteer assessment panel that is pulled from the consortium, and whose recommendation goes to the full group for no objection on eligibility. So as I mentioned previously, 2 standards have been pre-approved against this eligibility guide under CJA. These are the Carbon Fund's Methodological Framework and the VCS Jurisdictional and Nested Red Standard. The Carbon Fund has a pipeline of approximately 19 jurisdictional programs, of which about 3 of these have already signed agreements to enter implementation, and several more are expected before the end of the year, and hopefully close to 15 or more by the end of next year. And the VCS Jurisdictional and Nested Red Standard also has a number of Latin American and African countries advancing through this standard's requirements as well. With the completion of the assessments, which will take place on a rolling basis, the next step is to make this information available online on the eligible jurisdictional initiatives. So for each initiative, this will include links to publicly available documents that substantiate the initiative's eligibility, such as the program's strategy, reference level and MRV reports, safeguards, and monitoring reports, things like this. We also envision a high-level summary of the commodities produced and available to market in the jurisdiction, including things like approximate volumes, types, perhaps links to major industry associations, and where possible, supplementary information, for example, with regards to certified or verified deforestation-free products available in the geography. So this information will be online, but the implementing partners will also be proactively engaging companies with relevant supply chains in order to identify potential opportunities for company actions that can be profiled. So how might companies use this information? Well, there are rich conversations underway about the diverse actions companies can take to support jurisdictional sustainability initiatives and how these actions might vary depending on a company's position, for example, on a supply chain or the maturity of the jurisdictional initiative. But CJA focuses specifically on this one particular and powerful set of actions under this sort of umbrella of procurement, which is where a company brings and expands its business through its procurement decisions. CJA probably will not provide rigid guidance here, but rather suggests some flexibility in the types of actions companies might take under this umbrella of preferential sourcing. But in general, this refers to increased or extended procurement from eligible jurisdictions, whether through long-term contracts with suppliers, focusing new procurement in these geographies. Potentially in some cases, we could envision like a memorandum of understanding with a qualifying jurisdiction. And of course, when such actions can be made public, they can certainly magnify their impact in terms of a market signal. And I'd also say CJA does not really advocate divestment from higher risk geographies, but rather focuses on the positive signal of associating your business as feasible with ambitious initiatives that are showing progress. We would even stress that business engagement is also needed in these higher risk geographies to get them on a path to lower deforestation. However, in these cases, an alternative engagement strategy probably makes more sense. So on learning and adaptive management, I'd simply stress that we're just coming online in the coming months as the first initiatives establish eligibility. We expect a couple announcements soon, so there will certainly be adaptive management as we go with this learning. On one hand, we've heard already that many appreciate the relative simplicity of this approach, as well as its link to well-established criteria associated with the RED+ space and all the work that's happened there. On the other hand, I think it's fair to say these criteria are fairly stringent. Some jurisdictions may have taken years already to establish all the pieces for a jurisdictional RED program, including a baseline and MRV capacity to measure against it. So it's possible in the near term, not many jurisdictions will actually be able to demonstrate reduced deforestation jurisdiction-wide, particularly if they're outside some of the existing RED platforms. There's also not perfect correlation between jurisdictions likely to be eligible under CJA and some of the major production geographies. However, there are many potential overlaps. Think of places like Mato Grosso, East Kalimantan, Ghana, as well as potential benefits to smaller market countries that become eligible, and even for companies and markets within these countries. And quite in line with this discussion today, we've also heard from many stakeholders the need to clarify how CJA relates to or differs from the other approaches out there. So this will be a near-term communications priority with our partners on the call today, and we'll benefit from your feedback after the call. So before wrapping up, I wanted to just quickly highlight a few of CJA's key focus areas for the next 6 to 12 months. We anticipate several initiatives signing agreements at the Carbon Fund, which, if they opt to participate, can come online fairly quickly under the CJA umbrella. And we're also doing the first pilot assessments of initiatives that don't qualify under these pre-approved standards. Mato Grosso is the first of those. And we're also doing deep dive exchanges with several companies on the business logistics of preferential sourcing in order to better understand the specific options for companies in different supply chains and what information they need or what enabling conditions are needed to support these types of actions on the side of companies. And lastly, we're looking forward to releasing an improved website and interface for making all of this information easily accessible to anyone who wants to learn more. So I'll close here. We really welcome any and all questions and criticisms, or if you prefer to follow up bilaterally, my email is listed here and we'd appreciate hearing from you. And I guess I'd say, if I can be even a little presumptuous, I'd say none of the methodologies presented today is offering a silver bullet or whole solution to how we engage businesses and jurisdictions, but hopefully they provide some tools or avenues for new learning, impact, and much needed breakthroughs so that businesses can participate more directly and more powerfully as part of the solution set in jurisdictional sustainability. So thanks.
Great, thank you, Lloyd and Jeff and Willem. So we have received a couple of questions through the chat. Please do continue asking any questions you may have. And I'm going to just pose the first question to Willem, which regards the VSA. Willem, if you could share with us how members of the local impact teams are selected and how priorities are set, that would be great.
Yeah, I'm not sure whether local impact teams is the right word. We talk about the compacts, no? And the compacts are the stakeholders in the jurisdiction. We believe that stakeholders in the jurisdiction need to be all the relevant stakeholders, which means obviously producers, but also local government, very important, something that is missing in some other concepts. And also organizations, local NGOs, but also indigenous people representatives. All these stakeholders have an interest in sustainability in their jurisdiction, and therefore they should all be on the table. I believe that only we can make sustainability happen if everybody agrees to certain goals and certain milestones.
Great, thank you. And then Willem, just another question for you is, are high conservation value commitments included in any of the VSA readiness pilots?
Yeah, we have divided our impact themes in two ways. One is the global impact themes. Those are the themes that relate to the commitments that most of the companies in Europe, US, and elsewhere have made towards their consumers. And also another impact theme is the local impact themes. And in the local impact themes, anything can be put in that is important for the local context, realizing that not every jurisdiction is the same. And therefore, on the ground, some issues may be completely different than in other countries or other regions. In this latter part, the HCV will fit.
Excellent, thank you for sharing that. And then obviously, just so the participants know, the panelists can see the questions that you're asking. So if there's an opportunity for follow-up, please do not hesitate to contact the panelists directly as well. You have their contact information on the slides. Another question that's come up for Lloyd on the CJA, have you considered using this as a tool for divestment?
Good question. And to be frank, I couldn't say I'm certain that there's perfect agreement across the consortium on this, so I'd like to come back on it. But in general, I think we feel that the positive signal is the more important one. Most importantly, what we don't want to do, or the impact we don't want to have, is to create massive leakage, have high performing and low performing jurisdictions. So we're focused on the carrot, and we think we should be focusing on other jurisdictions in other ways to get them along this path. But we don't think there's necessarily a lot of value in the long term from basically blacklisting jurisdictions that aren't meeting these criteria. So that's, I guess, my initial take on that.
Great, thank you. And then two questions that are somewhat related about the role of buyers. So there does seem to be quite a heavy emphasis on end buyers, and there's a question about, what about the role of suppliers? I don't know, maybe Willem, do you want to respond to that one, or that's kind of an open question, but that is the question. What about the role of suppliers rather than just end buyers?
Suppliers, you mean the people in supply chain, the traders?
That's my interpretation of the question, yes. It was asked anonymously, but that is my interpretation of it, yes.
Okay, we believe that the verified sourcing area concept can give the traders an additional service to their clients, which is basically sourcing from verified sourcing areas, which has known sustainability targets and known commitments on sustainability. That is an additional value to their offering to clients.
Great, thank you. Lloyd or Jeff, if you want to respond to that at all?
Yeah, I would just say briefly that I think with Commodities jurisdictions approach, I think there's some room for engagement regardless of where you are on the supply chain. And for suppliers, we would hope that they can be engaged directly in the strategies under a jurisdictional initiative that's relevant in this initiative. And of course, the procurement or sourcing decisions have to carry through the supply chain as well, so they have some benefits to other parts of the supply chain as well. But I guess I'd leave it there for now.
Great, thank you. And then a related question to this was whether there's been any buyers that have publicly endorsed any of these approaches, or any indication that they will use the methodology to assess jurisdictional sourcing.
Yeah, I can speak for CJA, which is that we are still in the early days of now with having the first qualifying jurisdictions come online, and we expect some real acceleration here in the months ahead. This is now where we can really up our game in working with companies and creating opportunities for direct engagement along these lines. I think it's worth noting, as I mentioned in the presentation, though, that this model was born out of a commitment or statement that Unilever and Marks and Spencer made a couple of years ago in support of this type of model. So we think that that signal was, of course, a foundational one for this initiative.
Yeah, Petra, for the verified sourcing area, that can be easily answered. We have several pilots up and running, and in these pilots, we do have committed end buyers who are helping us test what can be done by end buyers to become committed, and also they are heavily involved in making sure that the jurisdictions can achieve their goals and their milestones. So yes, for us it seems to work. Obviously, these are front runners. We now have to transport that to mainstream companies as well.
And likewise for LandScale, the pilots are an opportunity to gain that early experience. And in each of the pilots, there are specific companies that have the procurement footprint. So we're working with those actors in really a co-development mode to better understand their needs for this tool as we continue to build it.
Great, thank you. And then I will just ask one more question. I think it would be great if all of the presenters could respond to this one. The question is, what, if any, duplication do you see between these three initiatives? You've all alluded to the fact that you are collaborating to some extent on the back end, and that each of these tools or initiatives has a unique role to play. But the question really is, do you see any, and what, if you do, duplication between these initiatives?
Who wants to go first on this one? This is Lloyd. I can take a first stab here, and I guess I would say I see more room for complementarity than I do for duplication, right? With CJA already has sort of a set of criteria built into it that are, a legacy of a lot of work that was done under the UNFCCC and in the red space. And there's, we've already talked a little bit amongst ourselves about some of these complementarities. For example, companies might use LandScale to assess sustainability progress and risks in contexts that don't yet meet the requirements of CJA, because I pointed out that it's a relatively high bar for a jurisdiction to be achieving reduced deforestation jurisdiction-wide. And certainly VSA Compacts could be used as a tool or nested mechanism within broader jurisdictions to reach the performance level needed for CJA. So I see these mostly as complementary, but I think we have some work to do to make that a little bit clearer to the non-techno audience in this space. Over.
Yeah, to add to that from my side, thanks, Lloyd. I think that's great. Yeah, prefer to describe it not as competition or overlap, but rather to think about where there's commonality and where there's complementarity. I think there's value in commonality where there's multiple tools that are trying to look at fairly similar things. An example of that may be with the assessment frameworks that are included within LandScale and VSAs. So our two initiatives do have an open dialogue about how we can move toward commonality with respect to certain assessment indicators. I think we can all agree that it can benefit the world if we don't have a lot of noise about how certain topics of common interest are evaluated. So that's the conversation that we're having. I think the other part is complementarity. And again, there's a certain amount of dialogue and deliberateness to trying to foster that complementarity. And the more feedback we get from prospective users, the better job we can do. From LandScale perspective, I think we see that the LandScale tool is oriented toward perhaps a broader array of sectors, in the sense that it is looking at also sectors such as extractives that can have a big footprint in landscapes, including in landscapes where agribusiness and forestry are also present. You can think of contexts such as West Africa, where mining is a big deal. So LandScale does look at those other economic sectors. Additionally, we are looking to bring value not just in the sourcing and procurement context, but also with respect to private and multilateral investors, as well as bringing the measurement and impact assessment lens to track landscape sustainability performance. So those are a few areas where there may be some complementarity brought by the LandScale initiative.
Great, thank you. We are coming up against time, so I'm going to go ahead and close the meeting. Thank you for everyone that's participated. This webinar was recorded, and I will be circulating the recording of it shortly, so you are welcome to share it with your colleagues and peers. Thanks very much to the presenters for their time, as well as for the great questions that we got. And please definitely do follow up with the initiatives if you have further follow-up questions or need further clarification. And if you have any feedback on the Jurisdictional Exchange Network or any ideas for content that you would like to see on future calls, please, please do get in touch with me directly. And thanks everyone for joining.
Thanks, TFA, and talk to you soon.
Thanks, Petra, and all.
Thank you.
Good day.
Great day.